everybody, it's Connor here. Just before we get started on the episode, wanted to let you know that unfortunately the AC in our studio is out right now, and we have a fan on in the background so that we don't pass out while we're recording the episode. If you hear some extra noise, that's why, and hopefully it'll be gone soon. Appreciate all of you.
Welcome to Theology Thursday, an ecumenical space for students to discuss matters of faith and theology.
I'm your host, Connor Grubbs.
I am your co-host, Ryan Mock.
And I'm your co-host, Johnny Grubbs.
Well, here we are for the second episode of Season 6. This is kind of a two-parter here. We're continuing our introduction to Revelation. Again, for returning listeners, if you're like, where's the subpoint? Man, we're taking our show. We want to kind of shorten it and really focus on the theological topics and questions that we're addressing every week. So if you're interested in some points, those are kind of our takes on things that aren't necessarily directly theological. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's a little more somber. But we get into news and other things and just kind of bring our perspective, whatever that's worth. Not much, but you should subscribe to us on Patreon if you're interested in hearing some of that stuff, because Subpoints is all over there now. It's a whole separate show. We are going to continue today. We're talking about the millennium, the tribulation. Going to get right into it with our series on Revelation. So without further ado, let's begin. Now we are going to discuss the millennium. Okay, so this is the 1,000-year reign of Christ that is referred to in Revelation chapter 20. So there are multiple views on the millennium, and we're going to look at, four of them really, the four major ones. So historic premillennialism. This is the view that the tribulation occurs, Jesus comes back, the Antichrist is judged, and the righteous are resurrected, and there is a literal 1,000-year reign for the church. It's important to specify that. It's a 1,000-year reign of Christ where the church gets to live in that reign. And afterwards, Satan starts a rebellion, and Jesus kicks his butt. This was pretty popular with the ancient church, and it is probably the least popular view today. There's not a whole lot of people that hold to this nowadays. Then there's the real popular one, dispensational premillennialism. Okay, this is kind of the major one in the evangelical world, particularly in America. Okay, so the rapture occurs. We get to start with that concept. It's a great way to start. Rapture, then the Antichrist. There's a 7-year tribulation. And the Battle of Armageddon happens, which is Israel versus all of its opposers, all those who oppose Israel. Jesus comes and kicks the Antichrist butt, and the opponents are thrown into Hades to await their final judgment, while those who were pro-Israel, pro-Jesus, get to partake in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. So Israel gets to physically rule the earth, because the church has already been raptured. The church is the ones who were raptured at the beginning of this.
They're taken
journey.
away. Yeah.
Then Satan rebels again. Then Jesus kicks his butt again.
Man, Satan just can't seem to learn his lesson here.
In all of these views, Jesus kicks Satan's butt. So that's one thing.
They're all in agreement
tend to be
there.
a common theme.
That is one thing that Christians who read Revelation can agree. Jesus kicks Satan's butt, and that's a very important. I mean, it's good that we all agree on that. And I think that's where kind of, even though there's some weird things here and it matters where we stand on this, like that's kind of where the orthodoxy comes in, is that Jesus is coming back to set things right. We can talk more about that later. But I'll say right off the bat, just saying that, I had to stop myself from chuckling a couple of times. It's the most complicated. I feel like it's just all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of steps here, and it's part of why we've talked about sort of Christian Zionism before, this sort of just putting Israel on a pedestal.
Yeah, just hyper-focus on Israel and how we need to help Israel to usher in the kingdom. And
so this one leads to a lot of kind of geopolitical implications that have led to a lot of why so much of the American church is like heavy-leaning Republican and all these things. So, I mean, that's a whole other thing right there. Postmillennialism is that a figurative 1,000-year reign begins after Christ's ascension, okay, and ends when Jesus comes back.
And the key point here is that leading up to this time, there's going to be an increase in quote-unquote Christianization of the world.
Yes,
things are going to get better before Jesus returns.
Increase in the gospel, and Christians will be at the forefront of culture during this reign of Christ. So, so according to that view, we're in it right now.
Yes.
And that's why it ends up at this point having to be figurative, because it's been more than 1,000 years since Christ's ascension. And as we'll discuss as we go further into this series, there's a lot of figurative numbers in Revelation. That numerology aspect is fairly common to the genre. Then there's amillennialism. That is, again, a figurative millennium, which is inaugurated with Christ's resurrection. He gained victory over Satan and the curse, and his kingdom's reign on earth began. And he will return, kick Satan's butt, and fully reconcile all things to himself. This view is also very popular in the ancient church.
It is also the most simple to understand.
It's the most simple to understand.
You don't need a chart.
It's similar to postmillennialism, except it doesn't emphasize this idea that the church will be at the forefront and things will get better and better. Now, though I think... we see that simply in the sense that, spiritually speaking, certainly things are getting better and have gotten better since Christ's resurrection, because we're out of that covenant. We're in this new covenant where the gospel can be preached and all are grafted in. And so that's kind of that's encouraging news. And I think, if we're back in the dispensational premillennialist thing, we're waiting for a literal 7-year reign of terror by an antichrist. And if we're not pro-Israel, then we're also evil.
And we're not going to get raptured.
There's a lot of fear there.
It's also such a new idea.
It's the most recent of all the ones we've talked about.
If you want to be hyper-Orthodox, you want to go a little bit further back.
Yeah. And, with all millennialism, to me, it just makes the most sense, because that's what Jesus basically leaves with his disciples is, go out in the authority that I've given you and, keep ushering in my kingdom, and that's what we get to do every day when we live godly lives and share the love of Christ with others, is we're seeing pockets of his kingdom show up on earth, and eventually he'll return and make that all full and final and reconcile things to himself. So, I know last we had this conversation, we were all millennialist.
Yes.
Are we still there?
Yes, although, and I was like this before, even more so then than I am now, I'm still very sympathetic to the post-millennial position.
Yeah.
I like the idea of things getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's certainly potential for that, but I also don't think that's necessarily laid out in Scripture very clearly. Partial preterist millennials. So far, if we're trying to put labels on it, which I don't even necessarily like, that would describe us, and certainly our audience is probably more diverse than we are and have different ideas. And like we said, all these are within orthodoxy. There are a lot of big problems that I have with dispensational premillennialism that we will talk about as we go throughout the series, because, like I already kind of said, it focuses on fear, and I think a lot of that's coming from extra biblical places, and that's not a good thing. So,
one thing I will say, and I can't substantiate this claim fully, but from what I've experienced working with pastors and talking with pastors, is a lot of them share the same eschatology. A lot of people as us.
Okay.
A lot of pastors come out of seminary with the same conclusion, right? Because, and we'll make a case for it on the show. I think it just makes the most biblical sense.
What happened is, in evangelism, there's a lot of pastors that didn't go to seminary.
Right.
There's some denominations where it's very easy to get ordained. And a lot of people, even those who did go to seminary, their congregants weren't listening to them. They were listening to Tim LaHaye and other people that were writing books and creating television shows.
Well, Christianity became commercialized, and so
and that stuff sells because it's entertaining and it's interesting, but it's not biblical. But it sort of just got adopted by a lot of people.
And a lot of pastors, I don't know what the deal was at the time, but they were just kind of like, oh, you like that? Okay. There wasn't, and it's not, I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I do wonder, hindsight's 2020, what would have happened if we had said, hey, Left Behind's not a great interpretation of Revelation. Maybe you enjoy it, but it's not good eschatology, because a lot of people thought, Tim LaHaye he's the end times guy. My pastor's good for Sunday morning, but Tim LaHaye will tell me how the world's going to end. And pastors did nothing to, and I know that's hard, right? When you call out a book or call out an author, maybe there's things that Tim LaHaye wrote other books maybe that they liked, and I don't know. I don't know what the deal was.
I don't know which one it was, because unfortunately, it is. I don't mean to be like overly critical or mean or anything, but if you look at his other stuff, the books that he wrote on marriage,
they're not
very, very problematic. Right? Just across the board. So it wasn't just his end times that was bad. This guy just had bad theology in general. So I don't know.
I don't know how it happened, but it happened
as a final note on all of that, though, for me, there are educated pastors who are dispensationalist, premillennial, and there are lay people who are dispensationalist, premillennial, that are not crazy and believe wacky things. So we got to show respect to them.
And I think usually, because I think it's important to emphasize that the ones who aren't getting like crazy and weird with it usually just see, like, when they read scripture, they found this timeline. Okay, there's going to be this 7-year thing where the Antichrist says this. There's going to be 1,000 years where this happens. And most of the ones that I know that I can honestly respect that are teaching it that way are not trying to tie it into current political events or adding American history into it. That's where it becomes problematic, and it's very easy to do in that view, is sort of trying to crack the code of how these things tie into it. If you're just saying, I think this is what's going to happen at the end, but still acknowledging, we don't know when it's going to happen, America's not at the center of it, then there's, I think probably for some people, having sort of a timeline and some numbers and an order of events, just helps it make more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
and some people just think that way, and I get that.
And those are the people that take the rest of Scripture seriously too. They're not hyper-focused over here. They're like my responsibility is still the same. It's to usher in the kingdom of God. It's to do, and maybe this stuff will happen, and maybe it'll happen in this order. But it doesn't change my mission in life.
It's a good thing to emphasize, because there's a lot of pastors that I respect that would fall in that category. Where I think this becomes dangerous, and why I warn against it, is it can become something that is all about fear-mongering, leads to conspiracy theories, leads to people getting all obsessed and trying to crack this code and figure out the timeline, and that's not healthy.
Yeah.
So just be careful with that. Okay. I have some incriminating audio on you.
Yeah, I'm scared but intrigued.
So, I'm going to take my headphones off for a second. I will put this. I'll put this in the show, because right now I'm probably not going to pick it up, but it's around this point. You may have to wait a second. It's just one thing that I'm not sure you would totally agree with now, but I have audio of you saying it.
I have John MacArthur's study Bible. I highly recommend John MacArthur.
That was the one. You saying I highly recommend John MacArthur.
When was this? When was this episode?
This was a year ago, June 14th. I mean, not a year ago. It was around the same time that we did this. So, 2018. So this was, 5 years ago now?
Oh, it makes sense why I would have said that 5 years ago.
Do you still highly recommend John MacArthur?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so that was the quote I wanted to get.
My respect for John MacArthur in the past 2 years has absolutely plummeted.
Yeah, we've talked about some of his goofiness on the show before. If you like John MacArthur, I think Ryan could sympathize with you. Why? Maybe there's some of his teaching or book. I've got to be honest with you. Never listened to any of his sermons. Never read any of his books. I know there's some people who really like him. The dude has said some, just blatantly racist things from the pulpit, some blatantly misogynistic things at conferences and stuff, and has also actively like tried to ignore and kind of brush abuse under the rug in his church. And then has said some very bizarre political things as well.
He's not a good Christian example, and that's kind of what you would want in a pastor.
Yeah.
To just be like, at least on a basic level, like there should be a Christian example of like how a Christian should live and talk.
Yeah.
You could make an argument. One of the reasons why, because I would have been I was not in the same boat in 2018, but I was.
You had a John MacArthur Bible.
Yeah,
study.
I did. I
Study
had a study Bible, and even further back, I highly recommend him. Read all his books. It's funny because back in the day when I was a little bit more starry-eyed, I thought he was an excellent biblical scholar as well. He's sort of just an all-right biblical scholar, and then he's done some study that's I guess helpful, but you can get it from better people. To be honest with you, so
I want to go on the record.
But
I want to go on the record to apologize to everybody that I ever made that recommendation.
So I think that might, like, out of all 4 episodes, that was the only thing I heard that after 5 years that was not still in line.
That's wild that I said that. I mean, I get why I said that.
I was trying to find incriminating quotes on Johnny, on myself. The only thing that happened, and I made a note of this too because I wanted to mention it. So I farted and left it in the episode.
No way.
But the other thing that's hilarious is as I was listening and taking notes, in real time, I farted in sync with myself on the episode. Like as I was listening a couple days ago. Yeah, I was typing up my notes and I farted at the exact same time that I farted on the show in my headphones. So
I hope we're not losing Patreon.
I literally farted in sync with myself.
That might be a sign of the time. I think the rapture is near. Are you guys wearing your rapture pants, right?
Your rapture-proof pants. We talked about that in the episode 2.
So much.
The Nicolas Cage Study Bible and the rapture-proof pants. Maybe I should get on that. I'm working on printing some new merch. Maybe I could get some like joggers that just say rapture-proof on the down,
like in the seam or something.
And like says no, it wouldn't be subtle. I'm gonna put it in bold letters down the leg. They're gonna be like sweatpants. Dude, this is great. That's we were talking about earlier. Like, what do we do for our next? We could do rapture-proof shirts. We got you guys. It's this season, Revelation, baby. Let's do this.
Rapture-proof pants. Don't be embarrassed arriving at the pearly gates.
Rapture-proof pants and your Nick Cage Study Bible. This is fantastic. So I just took note of that I farted in sync with myself. We can keep moving on. Okay, so the last episode we did, and technically, I'll note this was supposed to be like a 6-part series. So we also have an episode where we talked about hell, and we have an episode where we talked about the Antichrist. I'm not going to review those things today because I feel like this stuff is all like sort of foundational to kind of your overall perspective on Revelation. Those stuff we can talk about when we get to them. We also did an episode much later that was not a part of the series on the Mark of the Beast. I'm going to have to figure out how to title these episodes because when we did the eschatology series, we always talked about, we're so proud of that. That was like the best thing we ever did. That was so good, guys. We look at us. We did our eschatology series.
We're not that into ourselves, but yeah.
No, but you would always say, that's the most proud. If we ever like look back on our body of work.
That is one of my favorite series.
Right. And you know, I said that nobody listened to it. I'm like, 9 views, that's really low for us. So, and like the listens are even lower.
Well, maybe you guys could go back and listen to it in tandem with this.
Well, no, that's why we did this episode.
Well, why are we doing this?
No. Listen, first of all, the Mark of the Beast episode we did as the season finale last season was very popular. And so was what happened. It was the titles, okay? Because what we did was Eschatology Part 1, Exegetical Views. Who wants to listen to that? It's
Wait,
like,
so you're saying we have to make it clickbaity?
So academic. Yeah. And then we did the Antichrist, and everyone listened to that, right? So like, or the Mark of the Beast, everyone listened to that. With this, we were doing, this is Eschatology Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. People see that and they're like, oh man, I gotta go listen to the other parts. So like, I don't want to just title it Revelation Chapter 1 verses
so
what through.
There's gotta be a standalone title.
Yeah.
So rapture-proof pants.
Name this one, Connor farts in sync with himself, gone wrong, 3 a.m. challenge.
Yeah, we got to think of some clickbaity titles.
No, but even without clickbaity titles, you could certainly easily title each section just
separately, like a standalone title.
And you got to do the thumbnails too. You got to, just like
that's what Matt keeps telling me. I got to do new thumbnails. Anyway, so nobody listened to it. But then people always request, if I put out, like, what do you guys want us to talk about? Revelation.
And
So
like,
we're finally...
we did, and then they're like,
well,
talk about it now.
we're doing it now. We're going to go deep. Okay, so this whole season, guys, is Revelation. So tell your friends.
Tell your mom, tell your dad, tell your aunt, your uncle.
So
we gotta hurry because the Lord's coming back. And
the last thing we did, and it's the last thing we're going to talk about today, unless you had some notes. Did you?
Not really. I'll save those. This is just about the numerology that would lead somebody to an amillennial or even post-millennial kind of, we'll talk more about it later.
Would that, like, fit with a specific chapter, or should that be like sign of a sort of an introduction thing?
No, I think it'll
just
fit.
wait.
Yeah,
Okay,
save it for later.
All right. So the tribulation, in most views, is this literal 7-year occurrence where the Antichrist is ruling the earth and Christians are being persecuted like crazy. It's really scary. Okay.
Just watch Left Behind 2. Tribulation.
So you may have heard, pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib. Which trib are you? And what that is referring to is where the tribulation takes place in reference to the rapture.
Yeah,
okay?
So the rapture takes place before the tribulation, during the tribulation, or after the tribulation.
Is the rapture on your list?
Oh, we'll talk about the rapture.
Okay, because
I mean, not for today.
Yeah,
but
that assumes you even think the rapture's in the Bible.
Right, exactly. So rapture being, at this point, all the believers at that time are taken up. Like,
minus
if
their
you're
clothes.
Yeah, if you're unless you got the pants, unless you got the pants. So yeah, I mean, you just kind of like disappear, like when Thanos snapped in Infinity War. So,
but a little bit more positive.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, as you see Left Behind,
not like
it's kind of spooky.
Mr. Stark, I don't feel so
yeah,
good.
So pre-trib, rapture occurs before the tribulation, mid-trib, halfway through, post-trib, after. Okay, so the millennial, post-millennial view is that the tribulation, as in just suffering and antichrist occurrences and movements, right? Anything that is antichrist, suffering of the church, it's a clear theme throughout Revelation, but there is little to back up the idea that it is a specific time period like 7 years. That's sort of the amillennial view, right? So in the same way that we are currently in the millennium, the reign of Christ, there's also currently is ongoing tribulation that the church is going through, and that's why we can both be in the reign of Christ and also see brothers and sisters suffering martyrdom and all these things in other parts of the world. Is both are true, and they will continue in a tension with each other until Christ returns. That's why we look forward to his return so much. Here's the thing that's important about this is, in all the views, and I think we can emphasize this over and over again, ultimately Jesus conquers evil.
Right.
Jesus wins in the end.
Jesus conquers all evil. And if we can agree on that, then we're off to a good start, all right? There's a lot of other stuff to talk about and explore as we're having that conversation, but that's the key. That's really the key to Revelation. Now, I don't want to wrap up quite yet. I want to say, do you want to talk about numerology now while we're at it? We'll have more content. Do we want to talk about the rapture now? Or do we want to wait till they naturally appear in a verse or a
Here's
chapter?
why I think I will wait. I would like to trace numerology throughout the texts as we encounter them.
But is there, could you introduce the concept so that as it pops up?
Just the idea is that in the ancient world that numbers, and this is true to this day, there's modern numerology and stuff as
Lucky
well.
number 13.
Right.
Unlucky number 13.
I just was so ingrained in culture at the time that everybody, there was just sort of a standard. Like, if you saw this number, you knew what it meant, and all of these things. And so a lot of times we're looking at it, is it literal or is it not literal? And, we're asking the wrong question because, the reader's actually that number means this.
Right.
That means completion. That means authority. That means this or that. And so if you don't start with the meaning, you won't really ever determine. You don't start with the meaning of the number. You won't ever really determine whether or not it is literal or whether or not you should even be asking that question.
Right.
Right. In the first place. And so. So I'll kind of trace that in more specificity throughout and then I don't have much to say about the rapture off the top of my head. I did some research on it. about 8 months ago, actually, I was did some hard research on it and cited N.T. Wright on it, and there's a couple, or it may even be a single passage in the gospel that gets misinterpreted, and people assume that there's going to be this rapture, but there really is no indication of a rapture in the book of Revelation itself.
Yeah, which is why I don't think it's actually necessarily going to pop up. That might be kind of a side note for us to talk about, because the proof texts that people use for the rapture don't come from the book of Revelation.
There's one in 1 Thessalonians or something,
and then there's
I
think one in one of the parables in the gospel.
Yeah, and the gospel's where somebody will stay and another will be taken up,
and that's it. I mean, there's nothing in Revelation.
Basically, one of the arguments that N.T. Wright says is that's the nature of life. It's basically I'm totally butchering it, but it's not to take people for granted, or the relationships that you have for granted because of the type of times that we live in, and stuff like that. And so there is an urgency to evangelize your friend, because they may not be there tomorrow, and that we know that's true. And unfortunately, we've seen some of the carnage lately on TV and things like that. And the idea is spread the kingdom while you can, because you don't know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
So that was a lot. We kind of have this intro to Revelation. Very excited about that.
As a final note, for people who are new to these concepts that we've introduced, and you really feel man, I have no idea what these guys are talking about, I highly recommend that you stick with listening to our episodes, because these topics will come back up as we go through Revelation chapter by chapter. And so you'll be able to start to see the threads appear and follow them, instead of just right now you're just getting an info dump.
Yeah.
But as we follow Revelation chapter by chapter, these ideas come back up. Be able to spend more time and follow this thread to make it hopefully more accessible to you.
Certainly. As kind of a fire hydrant. I mean, there's a lot of information, but it's all introductory, and I think it'll start to make more sense as we actually go through the book. And that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, and coming full circle, right? You said, and I understand why you said it, but like you said at the beginning, it's we chose to come back in with Revelation, and it's that's because even that line of thinking comes from, I think, a misnomer and a flawed way of thinking about Revelation. And so I hope that by the end of this, when you hear about Revelation or you think about Revelation, you're able just to think, oh, that's one of my favorite New Testament books.
Let me say
alongside 1st and 2nd Thessalonians or any other book.
And I'm gonna actually say more so than any other book. My hope is that by the end of this, when you're going through something in the Old Testament, or maybe even a part of the Gospels or the Epistles, and you're getting overwhelmed, that Revelation is the part of the Bible you go to go back to the simple gospel of Jesus Christ and the hope that we have in Him. Because that should be kind of the summary, because that was the intention of it, really,
right.
is to wrap up the Old and the New Testament, the message of the gospel all together, and give us hope for what's to come. So my hope is that you would turn to that when things feel overwhelming or complicated, as the simple gospel and a reminder of that.
It's interesting that you say that, because I do that a lot when I'm counseling people. I say, okay, well, I'll tell you what you do next. Let's start with Revelation 21, right, which describes when Christ finishes the job, fully establishes His kingdom, and how He's wiping away every tear. There's going to be no more pain, no more crying. It's the hope that we should be building into the world by advancing Christ's kingdom every day.
Ultimately, wherever you land on this, Jesus conquers all evil, and this is not a message of fear, it is a message of hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's know that going into it.
Yep.
And I will leave us with one quote from Michael J. Gorman. Once again, he says, and I think this is a good summary as we wrap up today. Revelation is not about the Antichrist, but about the living Christ. It is not about a rapture out of this world, but about faithful discipleship in this world. Mm-hmm. That is, like every other New Testament book, Revelation is about Jesus Christ and about following Him in obedience and love. If anyone asks, why read the Apocalypse, another name for Revelation, the unhesitating answer must be to know Christ better. That's from Michael J. Gorman. Beautiful.
Powerful.
So, if you're looking for further study, some of the books that were used today, we're reading Revelation Responsibly by Michael J. Gorman, and Revelation for Everyone by N.T. Wright. Do you have any books you'd like to recommend, cite, that you used?
Well, I'm using Revelation for Everyone by N.T. Wright. I'm also using a commentary by Simon Kistemacher.
Okay.
I think it's just called Revelation,
Okay.
whatever. But Kistemacher is a respected commentator on Scripture. So.
Yep. And do you have any commentaries, books you want to recommend right now?
No, not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay, well, these things are all in the show notes. There's links to them. You can order them on Amazon. We are just starting the conversation. We want you to continue this study for yourself. And if you have any questions along the way as we're going through this series, please send them to us at theologythursdaypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to our Patreons for supporting us. And if you're interested in becoming a Patreon, there's a link to that in the show notes as well. You can see the different tiers and rewards that come with that. It helps us continue this show and keep improving the quality of it. We're so thankful to each and every one of you for listening. And Ryan, if you would.
Yeah, yeet.